Media versus Truth, a deeper look into the Emmett Till story by Sasha Goodlett. This quote by Malcolm X defines the influence of the media perfectly. Media is meant to be a way for people to be informed of what is going on in the world today. Unfortunately, this power has been used in such a way to manipulate and deceive than to unbiasedly inform those within a certain area or community. Today, the media serves as the judge and jury before a trial can be had or facts can be completed. Throughout the history of media, there are prime examples of the media using its power to twist facts and employ Americans to feel a certain way about the story that they are reporting. This type of reporting is very obvious when it comes to racial-specific cases, especially those that involve minorities and those that end in death. This brings me to the case of Emmett Till. The murder of Emmett Till was one of the first huge cases that was reported throughout the country. My point of this presentation is to present the facts in the Till story and show how the media used these facts and portrayed different stories. I want to compare both the Mississippi media and the African American media's portrayal of the story. First, I want to discuss two witnesses who were present with Till on August 24th and their accounts of what happened on that day. The first witness was Emmett Till's cousin, Simon Wright, the son of Moses Wright, Emmett's uncle, and who he was staying with at the time. Simon's account of the story is that after dinner on August 24th, him and his older brother Maurice, Willer Parker Jr., and Emmett decided to drive into Money because they were bored. Simon says that they parked the truck, walked over to the Bryant store. That is when Willer went into the store to buy something. After Willer walked out, Emmett walked in. Shortly after Emmett entered the store, Maurice told Simon to go in after Emmett. Simon said when he walked in, he saw Emmett get what he wanted and bought his purchase with no problems. After they exited the store, Carolyn Bryant came out and was walking towards her car. That is when Emmett turned around and whistled. Simon says that the whistle scared everyone, and their reaction is what scared Emmett and made him realize that he had made a terrible mistake. They rushed Emmett into the truck and left out of town. On the way home, Emmett begged them not to tell Moses what had happened because he did not want to get sent back to Chicago. 3 days went by and everyone thought everything was okay until early that Sunday morning around 2 a.m., Bryant and Millam came knocking on the Wright's door and took Emmett from their home. The second witness was Willer Parker. Parker was also Emmett's cousin. He had traveled with Emmett from Chicago to Mississippi. In his interview, he was quoted as saying, "Yeah, near the end of the day, dusk, it wasn't quite dusk by the time we left. Well, see, I can't remember how long we stayed there. We get to town and people are gathering up from the little settlements there. And it's still a small town. It's not like Greenwood. And the guys out there playing checkers, and I decided to go into the store and purchase some things. I don't know what I purchased, but I went in there and purchased some things. And while I was in the store, Emmett came in. And when Emmett came in, I felt, this apprehension because I knew how he was and I knew where we were. So I left Emmett in the store and Simon came in right behind him. Then the both of them came out the store. And after they came out facing the store, Miss Bryant came out and she was walking to the right of the store and Emmett whistled. And we just could not believe it. I mean, this is like something out of the sky blue. Where did this come from? What's wrong with him? And even now, we don't know what possessed him. He had no idea. Didn't have any idea of the danger. And so she proceeded to go around and somebody said that she was going to get a gun. After this, Parker stated how they rushed Emmett into the truck and sped off. His accounts of what happened afterwards were similar to Simon Wright's. So from these two accounts, these are the facts that we can conclude about the story of Emmett Till. When starting my research into the Mississippi media, I found the book Emmett Till in the Mississippi Press by Davis W. Hoke and Matthew A. Grandy. From reading this book, I learned that in the beginning, the Mississippi media was sympathetic to the death of Emmett Till. They ran stories that drew sympathy for Till. For example, the Clarksdale Press interviewed Emmett's older cousin, Maurice Wright, and he was quoted telling the press how Till had polio when he was younger and also had a speech impediment where it would be hard to understand what he was saying sometimes. The paper quickly exaggerated Maurice's words and wrote, "Those who kidnapped and murdered 14-year-old Emmett Till, a crippled, retarded child, have dealt the reputation of the South and Mississippi a savage blow." This outraged readers throughout the state, who were certain that those responsible for the death of young Emmett would go to jail and justice would be served. The papers were even putting the Christmas photo of Till in the press. In the photo, Till was with his mother, and they both were attractively dressed, and they looked like a happy family. If this was the attitude of the Mississippi press in the beginning, then why did Milam and Bryant go free? Why did the narrative change? Unfortunately, as the national press and the African American media got a hold of the story, Mississippians started to feel attacked. As Till death was called a lynching, and as the NAACP got involved, this is when the local media started to change the narrative of their story. They started to remove the pictures of Till and his mother and post pictures of the beautiful Carolyn Bryant. They started to tell her tale and, while in the process, demonize Till. They demonized him by saying that not only did he whistle, but while in the store, he sexually assaulted Bryant. They spoke of Bryant as this fragile woman whose husband was a good man who just wanted to protect his wife. They also brought up Till's father and his discharge from the army and hanging because he was accused of rape and murder of a white woman while stationed in Italy. No longer was Till's Christmas picture plastered in the news. His picture was hardly ever shown anymore, and when it was shown, it was a close-up of him in a hat. This picture was posted instead to make Till seem older than 14 years old. As the NAACP got more involved, the Mississippi media started to do stories on Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam and paint them as family men who were protecting their families at all costs. They even commented on their relationship with the African American community and money, stating that they had no problems and worked well together. The Mississippi press were trying their best to humanize these killers and draw sympathy for them. All because they knew if this story was portrayed as a young boy being killed because he was black, then this case would threaten their way of life. This case would be used as a marker to desegregate Mississippi, something that the majority of whites in Mississippi did not want. In the end, jurors saw the case as the media portrayed it, white versus black. They had to choose between fueling the civil rights fight or protecting their way of life. In the end, it was a unanimous decision that they would rather let J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant go free to preserve their way of life than to convict them of murder and kidnapping. That magazine was probably the most dedicated African American publication that reported the story of Emmett Till. Not only did they cover the story, but they also covered the funeral. Jet and other African American publications printed interviews with Till's mother where she stated that she would join the fight for injustice on behalf of her son. Also, as the investigation into the case proceeded, Northern reporters, black and white, started to take the trip to Mississippi. One of the most active in discussing Emmett Till was the NAACP. Their involvement infuriated local Mississippians in the Mississippi media, mainly because of how the NAACP looked at the story. The NAACP felt that Till was not murdered because he was disrespectful to Carolyn Bryant, but because he was a black boy who whistled at a white woman. Mississippi media felt attacked when the papers were making it about race. Most local media did not feel that race was an issue because Till was not sought out after for nothing. He had harassed Carolyn Bryant, and according to the trial transcript, Bryant also said Till had grabbed her and sexually assaulted her while in the store. We would later learn that she lied about what happened inside the store. So to cover up and rebuttal the race and lynching stories that were being put out by the African American media, the local media started to cover Till's story to support justifiable homicide. For the African American media, Till's death was only the beginning. See how the Mississippi media and African American media took the facts and made two different stories. One thing that is observed in media is the power of exaggeration of facts and also the dumbing down of facts. One example are the stories that both medias decided to report. The Mississippi media exaggerated the reasoning behind Till's death. The whistle outside the store had turned into sexual assault. It also played on the fear of a wife being assaulted and helpless by a man when their husbands were away. They played up the innocent persona of Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam and asked these white jurors and men across the state what would they have done if they were in Bryant and Milam's shoes. They harped on their backgrounds as Army veterans and men who had up until now gotten along with the African American community. As they did this, the mention of Emmett Till and his age became less and less. While the African American media watered down the whistle and never mentioned the alleged sexual assault, additionally they turned up the racial issues that plagued Mississippi for years. They reported that white people in Mississippi wanted to keep blacks down and segregated, so they murdered Till, not because of a simple whistle, but because he was a young black boy who whistled at a white woman. They did not report the life stories of Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam. They did not bother to print pictures of Carolyn Bryant. The African American media wanted to keep the attention on Till. The question the African American media asked readers were to picture this heinous crime happening to their 14-year-old child. What would they do? This fear struck black readers the same way the question of the Mississippi media had struck white readers. This is why supporters for the NAACP grew and others decided to take a stand. Black parents across America felt this could happen to their child, and young black teenagers felt that they too were Emmett Till. While this was happening, white supporters in Mississippi grew also because they empathized with the man protecting his wife. The African American Community is probably the publication that covered Till's open casket funeral the most. Till's mother was quoted in Jet magazine saying that she wanted the world to see what they had did to her baby. Before the funeral, pictures were taken of Till's corpse in a mortuary while his mother looked down on him. Her heart was hurting, and she wanted to publicize her pain, and that is exactly what African American publications did. The coverage of the funeral and the description of the smell of the corpse, along with the pictures, solidified Till's spot in the fight for civil rights. After the funeral, up until the trial, Mamie Till traveled with the NAACP, promising to join the fight for desegregation and equal rights. Her openness is what allowed for the Mississippi media to make accusations about how this whole thing was staged for publicity and report false stories discussing how Till was not dead but was in hiding and the corpse was not Till's. Either way, the open casket funeral embedded a dark picture into America's history and brought attention to discrimination and racial tension between white Americans and minorities, especially African Americans. As stated earlier, the Mississippi media was very particular about what stories to run that dealt with the Till case. This is why most did not cover the funeral of Emmett Till. They did cover the trial of J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant. They took pictures of the family men who were at the table and had their wives and taller children present. They chased their children around the overcrowded courtroom to show jurors just how much of dedicated fathers they were to their sons. They had multiple defense strategies. These strategies conflicted with one another, though. The first was justifiable homicide. Bryant was so hurt by the assault that he had went over and got Till for his wife's protection, and Milam just assisted him. They also claimed that they took Till, but then they realized that he was not the boy they were looking for and released him on the side of the road. There were also speculations that Carolyn Bryant was in the truck. Wright testified that when they took Till outside the home, they took him to the truck and asked, "Is this him?" to somebody inside. Wright said he heard a faint yes that sounded like a woman, and they put Till on the back of the truck and drove off. The fact that they drove off with Till against his consent shows that they were kidnapping him. But the defense claimed that once they got to money, they realized that they had the wrong boy and they had let him go on the side of the road. Then the defense called Bryant to the stand, who stated that inside the store, a man matching Till's description had sexually assaulted her. She was so afraid to tell her husband, but when he saw just how upset she was, she had no choice but to tell him what happened. This testimony played into the justifiable homicide defense claim. In the end, both men were found not guilty of murder and kidnapping, even though they had admitted that they had taken Till from Moses Wright's house. The African American media did not cover the trial as thoroughly as the Mississippi media, but they did cover Mamie Till's attendance during the trial. In my opinion, the trial was about Bryant and Miriam more than it was about Till, and they did not want to cover the story of these men. They just wanted to portray them as the murderers and not husbands nor fathers. Unfortunately, Till case was not the only story where an African American was unlawfully killed. The next slide shows 10 African Americans who were unlawfully killed, mostly by law enforcement. The thing these 10 people, along with Till, have in common is that they were all demonized at some point by the media. And the narratives of the mainstream stories was adjusted to make the victims seem like they were the aggressors and painted the killers like they were the innocent victims. The first was Trayvon Martin, a teenage boy who was followed by George Zimmerman, the neighborhood security. After Zimmerman was told by the police not to pursue him, he decided to confront Martin. Afterwards, he was stated that he feared for his life. A fight had proceeded between the two. Zimmerman then took out his gun and killed Martin. The next victim I want to point out is Terrence Crutcher, whose truck had stopped in the middle of the road. While the Oklahoma police were pursuing a suspect, they encountered Crutcher. You can hear the helicopter reporter saying that Crutcher looked like a bad man. Later, while trying to apprehend him, Officer Shelby of the Oklahoma Police Department shot and killed Terrence Crutcher. The media, of course, played the recording of the helicopter reporter stating that Crutcher was looking like a bad man. And Shelby stated in her report that she feared for her life. The last example of these 10 victims is the most recent story of Stephon Clark. Again, the police were in pursuit of another suspect, and they found Clark in his backyard at his home. In the video, they repeatedly yelled, "Gun, gun, gun," insinuating that Clark was in the possession of a firearm. Unfortunately, the officers killed Clark, and the only thing they found in his possession was his cell phone. When the police reported what happened, they stated they thought Clark had a gun. Clark was shot over 20 times, mostly in his back. All these victims were demonized at some point by the mainstream media, and the African American media came to their defense. They countered these demonizing characteristics and mugshots with reportings of the lives that these victims led. The African American media was responsible for bringing the humanity back into these victims who were unlawfully killed. The aftermath of Till's story resulted in his murderers, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam, selling their accounts of what happened August 24, 1955 to Life magazine for $1,500. They detailed how they took Till and how his lack of fear was ultimately the reason why they killed him, because he was not learning the lesson that they were trying to teach. The Mississippi media did not show any remorse, nor did they retract their demonizing and false stories about Till. They just acted like nothing happened. After the trial was over, so were the reports about Emmett Till. It has been 63 years since the death of Emmett Till in the Till case. Even after the truth was revealed, the media still did not learn the lesson about demonizing victims and just sticking to reporting the truth. I hope that this presentation has shown you all how the media can manipulate, exaggerate, and twist facts to support their own narratives. These recent cases are not special. The demonizing of minorities, especially African Americans, is something that happened in the Till case and in other multiple cases since then. As the unlawful and unjustifiable deaths of African Americans continue to happen, we will continue to see this demonizing narratives of victims in the mainstream media. When will the media learn that this sort of reporting is causing divisions between Americans and causing racial tension? How long will we continue to witness African Americans murdered while those responsible for their deaths are set free? The demonizing of an ethnicity is teaching mainstream Americans who rely on media sources for the truth to fear African Americans and minorities. With this sort of prejudiced fear, innocent bloodshed will continue to happen. So I will end this presentation with a question. How can media outlets learn to stop pushing their own personal, political, or racial agenda and go back to reporting the truth?